Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 65. Always read the first chapter of the manual.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
Been a little while since I've done a solo show. One of my more philosophical discussions about a particular issue. I've got a few more interviews coming up in the following shows. I thought it was worth discussing something that occurred to me the other day. The very first full-time job I had was working as a software developer for a small financial software company. We're only about 25 people in the entire company. About half of them were software developers. As a new programmer on the team, I was given the manual of the particular software product that we used to develop software. It was a pretty obscure product. That it wasn't like a mainstream computer language. It was some derivative of BASIC that I think only us and GEC in the US used. Now, of course, being given the manual, nobody expected me to actually read it. In fact, even I was a bit surprised that I decided to start reading it. What amazed me, though, was that in chapter 1 of the manual, apart from the usual introductory things to the language, there were also all the what's new and the very latest practices about what they learned in previous versions of the manual. But what soon became clear was that there were lots and lots of very basic or new things that even the old hands at the company didn't know. And I soon became an expert for lots of quick ways of doing things, which had been introduced after the people who'd been there for years had learnt the language. In my own business experience recently, I've noticed exactly the same thing. And that is, it's very easy to lose track of the simple things. I have forgotten the lesson that I learned then, which was always read the first chapter of the manual. It's worth reading and rereading things at regular intervals. Because even if you read the first chapter of the manual some time ago, you don't necessarily know what's changed since then. I mean, you probably know 90% of what the manual says, but I find it's extremely easy to end up with this kind of hubris where you think you know something and you never ever go back and look at it. But most of people, even the best learners in the world, aren't going to pick everything up first time. And things change. Things that may have been really difficult to do once suddenly become easy, and there's a shortcut or a new way of doing it, which will save you a lot of time. Even people who teach these things usually have blind spots. And I can see why they end up saying, I've got all this experience, and they want to feel like they know everything. And they want to impress on other people that they know everything so they can teach it. But this is quite a dangerous thing, because you end up with people teaching stuff that's out of date. I've been slightly shaken recently by a few things that I've discovered that I've been doing, well, wrong or not simply for ages. This is all because I thought I knew how to do them. First one was something that somebody said at Podcast Movement. You may have noticed that there's been a slight improvement in the sound quality for some of the interviews I've done recently. I went on a session about podcast production, and the speaker said something along the lines of always record your audio on separate tracks. And I thought I couldn't do that because I use a mixer and not recording software that most people use, which already splits the tracks for you. Someone else asked the same question of him at the end, and he gave him a withering look as if the guy was a total idiot when he asked, how do I split tracks with a mixer? And the speaker looked at him like a moron and just said, just pan yourself left and the interviewee right. And suddenly I realised that's what I should have been doing all the time. Previously, I was taking both my voice and the interviewee's voice on the same audio track. And what this meant was it was very hard to actually tell when a noise was coming from the interviewee or when it was coming from me. By having separate audio tracks for somebody on the left speaker and somebody on the right speaker, what it allows you to do is that whoever's not talking, you can clear all of their shuffling around on their chair or coughing or anything like that, because you know it's from the person who's not talking. And this does help massively with the quality of the audio. After discovering this, I decided to look to see if there was anything else that I could start relearning. I soon discovered something else with my podcast, and it's with the website specifically. Those of you who've been to beginselfpublishing.com may have noticed that for a long time the actual front page had all the descriptions of all the latest shows, but they were kind of looked wrong. The formatting wasn't really right, there were bits missing, and really they just looked awful, the summaries of the shows. Now by default, WordPress, at least my installation of WordPress, automatically scans through the show notes. So this is the whole post that goes with the show, and then creates a summary of it. Thing is, it just doesn't do a very good job. It just looks dreadful. And one thing it couldn't really get right was the fact that I had a picture between where it said episode 65, read chapter 1. I put a picture for the show, but the summary would cut out the picture and just run on the show title with the text, and it just looked dreadful. Now I just accepted this as the way it was supposed to be, and you couldn't change this. I decided to have another go at trying to fix this continuous problem that I'd been having with the show summaries. With a bit of Googling, I found that there was a hidden feature on WordPress called excerpts. What this allows you to do is underneath where you put the post, you can create an excerpt, and this is what it shows in those summary pages. So rather than having just an arbitrary bit of random text grabbed from the main article that WordPress itself tried to work out what the summary was, you could actually just type in a summary. I had to unhide the field called excerpt, which for some reason was hidden on my WordPress installation. But once I started to do that, I got very much more nicer summaries on the front page of my WordPress site. A very happy coincidence was that it also corrected the summary of the podcast on the podcast players as well. Depending on what podcast player you use, they usually take the summary text or they generate it themselves from the WordPress article. But those like Overcast that I use takes the WordPress excerpt, now that I've got it, rather than, again, a rather awfully formatted piece of information. And even better, it usually puts in a link to the actual article on the website. I've seen my website traffic go up because of that. So now with this newfound joy of having fixed a long-running problem, I also look for something else, where for years I've been having a real annoyance with the editing of the show. The software package I use is called Audacity. It's a free audio editing software. It's a little bit strange in places, but it's actually very good for editing audio, both for podcast episodes and potentially for audiobooks if you're prepared to spend the time sitting around doing the recording. It always had this very annoying feature where you press play on it and it will play a bit of the audio that you recorded. And then when you press stop, the point where it played from jumped back to where it started. Now in some cases, if you're going over a piece of audio and you want to correct it or take out an arm or something along those lines, then this is great. But I've been recently going through writing show notes based on listening to the interviews. And this was really annoying me because I was having to remember to click on the cursor to go to the point where the playing had stopped, rather than just replaying the same bit all the time. And quite a few times I forgot, and it was like, and this took a lot of my time away. So I thought, well, there must be a way of doing this. And again, with my good friend, Mr. Google, I discovered that if you press Shift A when you're playing, it will play with transport, and it will just play it the normal way that a normal MP3 player would play. So you press play, plays, and then it leaves the cursor of where you're going to play from next at the end of where it finished playing. And another case where if I'd actually spent the time to look at the features of the product before I started using it, i.e. reading chapter 1 of the manual, I would have already known this. As I'm coming into my book writing season, which usually happens to be November, I'm just looking for the same kind of ways to save time just by rereading or relearning the things that I thought I know. I'm sure there's lots of things in Scrivener that I could do differently. I'm also sure with the whole book publishing process, there's a lot of improvements I can make. The moral of the story is always to continually reassess things and never think you're a total expert in things. There will be easy things that you missed the first time around when you learnt something. And it's worth going back because they make a big difference to your productivity. Well, thanks for listening to the show this week, and we'll be back with another interview next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.